The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Catherine stood by the window of their private quarters, her fingers tracing the familiar pattern of the curtains she had touched countless times before. The silence between her and William had grown heavier over the past weeks, filled with unspoken words and lingering glances that carried the weight of their shared understanding. Today was different, though. Today carried a finality that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. William sat at his desk, supposedly reviewing documents, but his eyes kept drifting to his wife's silhouette against the morning light. 23 years of marriage had taught him to read her moods in the smallest gestures. The way she held her shoulders, the rhythm of her breathing, the careful stillness in her posture. Everything spoke of the decision they both knew was coming but couldn't bring themselves to discuss openly. The children had already left for their various commitments. George was at university, Charlotte was spending time with friends, and Louis was at his boarding school. It was as if fate had conspired to give them this moment alone, this space to confront what had been building between them for months. The official duties had continued as normal. The public appearances maintained their usual warmth and professionalism, but behind closed doors something fundamental had shifted. Catherine turned from the window, her blue eyes meeting William's for the first time that morning. No words were exchanged, but in that look volumes were spoken. They both understood that their paths, which had intertwined so beautifully for over 2 decades, were beginning to diverge in ways that duty and love could no longer bridge. The weight of the crown, the constant scrutiny, the sacrifices demanded of them individually, and as a couple had finally reached a breaking point. William stood slowly, his movements deliberate and careful, as if sudden gestures might shatter the fragile peace they had maintained. He walked to where Catherine stood, stopping just close enough that they could feel each other's presence but far enough apart that the distance between them felt symbolic of something much larger. They had weathered so many storms together, supported each other through scandals, losses, and the relentless pressure of public life. But this was different. The decision hadn't come suddenly. It had been building like storm clouds on the horizon, visible long before the first drops of rain. Late-night conversations that ended in silence, moments of connection, followed by days of careful politeness, and the growing realization that they had become different people than they were when they first fell in love as young adults at university. The institution that had given their love meaning had also, perhaps inevitably, placed demands on it that proved impossible to sustain. Catherine's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. She spoke of understanding, of gratitude for their years together, of the beautiful family they had created and the legacy they would always share. William listened, his own heart breaking with each carefully chosen word, knowing that her grace and dignity in this moment was exactly why he had fallen in love with her all those years ago, and exactly why this conversation was so impossibly difficult. The morning continued around them, the castle staff going about their duties, the world outside continuing its relentless pace, but in their private quarters time seemed suspended. They spoke of practical matters with the same care they had once reserved for planning their wedding, discussing arrangements for the children, the transition period, and how they would handle the inevitable public scrutiny that would follow their announcement. As the conversation drew to its natural conclusion, they found themselves standing by the same window where Catherine had begun her morning vigil. The sun had moved across the sky, casting different shadows now, marking the passage of time and the end of an era. They looked out together at the grounds of Windsor, at the place that had been their home and their prison, their sanctuary and their stage, understanding that whatever came next, this moment would remain theirs alone. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything they had shared, everything they were choosing to protect by stepping apart, and everything they would carry forward as individuals who had once been perfectly united, but now needed to find their own separate ways to serve, to heal, and to discover who they might become when the weight of their shared destiny was finally, carefully and lovingly set aside. The announcement came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered through the careful language of palace statements and official protocols. Catherine sat in her study as the words were released to the world, each phrase crafted to maintain dignity while acknowledging the end of what many had considered a fairy tale romance. The statement spoke of mutual respect, shared commitment to their children, and continued dedication to their royal duties. But the carefully neutral tone couldn't mask the earthquake that was rippling through the foundations of the monarchy. William was in his office across the castle when the news broke, watching the first reactions unfold on screens that seemed to multiply the shock and disbelief on countless faces. Social media exploded with speculation. News anchors struggled to maintain their composure, and the carefully maintained image of royal stability began to crack in real time. He had prepared for this moment, but seeing the actual impact felt like watching a controlled demolition of everything they had built together in the public eye. The children were contacted immediately, each receiving personal calls before they could hear the news from any other source. George, now mature enough to understand the complexities involved, listened quietly before expressing his support for both parents. Charlotte, ever the mediator, asked thoughtful questions about what this would mean for family gatherings and holidays. Louis, still young enough to focus on the practical, wanted to know if he would still have Sunday lunch with both parents. Their responses, so characteristic of each child, reminded both William and Catherine why protecting their family unit remained their highest priority. Staff members throughout the royal household moved with practiced efficiency, but the undercurrent of shock was palpable. Many had worked with the couple for years, witnessing firsthand the genuine affection and partnership that had characterized their marriage. Private secretaries fielded an endless stream of calls from government officials, Commonwealth representatives, and family members, each requiring delicate handling and careful reassurance about the continuity of royal functions. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Outside the palace gates, crowds began to gather, some holding flowers, others carrying signs of support, many simply standing in silent witness to a moment they felt needed to be marked in person. Television crews set up their equipment, preparing for days of analysis and speculation about what this would mean for the future of the monarchy. The fairy tale that had captivated millions was ending, not with drama or scandal, but with a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes love means knowing when to step apart. Inside the palace, Catherine found herself thinking about their wedding day, about the young woman who had walked down Westminster Abbey's aisle toward a future she could never have fully imagined. The weight of the crown that she had accepted with such grace had, over the years, reshaped not just her public role but her private self in ways she was only now beginning to understand. The constant scrutiny, the endless obligations, the requirement to be perpetually perfect had created pressures that no amount of love could entirely shield her from. William, meanwhile, was grappling with his own complex emotions about duty versus personal happiness. Raised from birth to understand his role as future king, he had always known that personal desires would sometimes conflict with royal obligations. But he had believed, perhaps naively, that love and duty could coexist indefinitely. The realization that they had grown apart, not despite their royal roles, but perhaps because of them, was a burden he was still learning to carry. The first evening after the announcement, they shared a quiet dinner together, a ritual they had maintained even during the most difficult periods of their marriage. The conversation was gentle, focusing on practical arrangements and the children's schedules, but underneath ran a current of shared grief for what they were losing and respect for what they were trying to preserve. They spoke of their plans to continue co-parenting seamlessly, their commitment to maintaining family traditions, and their determination to show the world that endings could be handled with grace. As night fell over Windsor, both Catherine and William found themselves in spaces that had been uniquely theirs throughout their marriage. She in the small sitting room where she had spent countless hours with the children, he in the study where he had prepared for his future role as king. These rooms, filled with personal touches and private memories, would soon need to be reimagined as individual spaces rather than shared sanctuaries. The process of untangling a life built together was beginning, one careful decision at a time. The evening news broadcasts led with their story. Royal experts offered analysis and historical context, and the world began to adjust to a new reality, where William and Catherine would chart separate courses while remaining united in their commitment to their children and their service to the crown. The fairy tale was ending, but what was beginning might prove to be something even more honest and ultimately more sustainable for everyone involved. The days following the announcement blurred together in a carefully choreographed dance of separation. Catherine moved through the familiar halls of Windsor Castle, each room holding memories that now felt like museum pieces from another life. Her personal staff worked quietly around her, packing belongings that would make the journey to her new residence. Each item a small decision about what to keep and what to leave behind from nearly a quarter-century of shared life. The logistics of royal separation proved as complex as the emotional aspects. Separate households needed to be established, security arrangements reconfigured, and staff assignments carefully managed to ensure continuity of service. Catherine's new home, a beautiful Georgian mansion in the Cotswolds, had been selected for its privacy and proximity to the children's schools. The house offered her something she hadn't realized she missed: the possibility of genuine solitude and the chance to rediscover who she was when not performing the role of future queen. William threw himself into his official duties with renewed intensity, as if the familiar rhythm of royal obligations could provide stability during this period of personal upheaval. His calendar filled with engagements, meetings with government officials, and the endless stream of responsibilities that came with being heir to the throne. His staff noticed a new seriousness in his approach, a subtle shift from the collaborative style he had developed with Catherine to a more solitary decision-making process. The children adapted with the resilience that had been nurtured in them since birth. George, now 21 and completing his studies, took on an almost protective role with his younger siblings, organizing family dinners and ensuring that traditions like movie nights and weekend walks continued, despite the changed circumstances. Charlotte, 18 and preparing for university, surprised everyone with her emotional maturity, becoming a bridge between her parents and helping to maintain the easy communication that had always characterized their family dynamic. Louis, at 15, struggled more visibly with the changes, though he tried to hide it behind the humor and charm that had always been his signature traits. His parents' careful attention to maintaining normalcy helped, but the absence of casual moments when all 5 family members were together created a void that everyone felt but no one directly acknowledged. Family dinners became more planned, less spontaneous, requiring coordination between 2 households rather than happening naturally under one roof. Public interest remained intense but began to evolve from shock to a grudging respect for how the separation was being handled. The absence of drama, the continued cooperation between William and Catherine, and their obvious shared commitment to their children's welfare created a narrative different from other high-profile royal divorces. Photos of them attending Louis' school events together, sitting apart but clearly comfortable in each other's presence, began to reshape public understanding of what their separation actually meant. Catherine's transformation became visible in small ways that the public and media began to notice. Her choice of clothing grew more personal, less constrained by royal protocol. Her schedule, while still filled with charitable commitments, included more private time and personal interests that had been set aside during her years of intensive royal duty. She began painting again, a hobby from her university days, and started spending time in the gardens of her new home, finding peace in the simple act of tending plants without the constant awareness of being observed. The media's initial feeding frenzy gradually gave way to a more measured coverage as weeks passed without scandal or dramatic revelations. Royal correspondents found themselves reporting on a separation characterized by maturity and mutual respect, rather than the bitterness and public battles that had marked other royal divorces. The story became less about failure and more about evolution, less about endings and more about 2 people finding new ways to honor their commitments while acknowledging their personal needs. Friends and family members navigated the delicate balance of maintaining relationships with both William and Catherine without appearing to take sides. Dinner party guest lists required careful consideration, holiday plans needed diplomatic handling, and longtime companions found themselves learning new protocols for a situation that had no royal precedent. The couple's grace in handling these social complexities made it easier for others to adapt, setting a tone of civilized cooperation that influenced everyone in their circle. As autumn arrived, bringing shorter days and the familiar cycle of seasonal royal events, both William and Catherine began to establish new rhythms. Their separate calendars still intersected for important family occasions and certain official duties, but increasingly they were creating independent spaces for themselves. The wordless goodbye was becoming a wordless hello to whatever came next, as they each began to discover who they might become as individuals rather than halves of a royal partnership. Christmas morning arrived with the weight of tradition and the challenge of creating new memories within familiar frameworks. Catherine woke in her Cotswolds home to silence, instead of the cheerful chaos that had marked Christmas mornings at Windsor for so many years. The carefully wrapped presents under her tree were fewer but more thoughtfully chosen, each one a small bridge to the children who would arrive later that morning for their established Christmas Day schedule. The plan they had crafted together was intricate but fair. Christmas morning at Catherine's new home, followed by lunch at Windsor with William, then an evening gathering that included extended family members who had become skilled at navigating the new dynamics with grace and understanding. The children moved between locations with practiced ease, though careful observers might have noticed the slight pause they each took when transitioning from one parent to the other, as if mentally switching between two different versions of home. George arrived first, bringing with him an energy that filled Catherine's smaller spaces in a way that reminded her why she had chosen this house. The scale was more human, more manageable, allowing for the kind of intimate conversations that had become precious during this period of transition. Charlotte and Louis followed, their arms full of packages and their voices full of stories from their Christmas Eve celebration with William, carefully shared in ways that included rather than excluded their mother from the experience. The gift exchange revealed the thoughtfulness that had gone into maintaining family traditions while acknowledging changed circumstances. Catherine had commissioned a series of photographs from their family life, carefully curated to celebrate their shared history without dwelling on what was ending. The children had collaborated on gifts that could be shared between households, books that could travel, jewelry that carried meaning across different homes, and small tokens that spoke of understanding and acceptance. At Windsor, William prepared for the afternoon gathering with the same attention to detail that Catherine had brought to her morning. The formal dining room had been set for a celebration that would include his father, Camilla, and other family members who had become part of their extended Christmas tradition. The absence of Catherine from the hosting role was felt, but not dwelt upon, as everyone worked to create an atmosphere of continuity and warmth. The afternoon meal proceeded with the kind of careful choreography that royal families master over generations. Conversations flowed naturally, touching on safe topics like the children's achievements, upcoming travel plans, and shared memories that could be celebrated without causing discomfort. William and Catherine sat at opposite ends of the table, close enough to share parenting moments, but far enough apart to maintain the emotional space they had both worked to establish. The children served as natural bridges during the meal, their easy movement between conversations with different family members, helping to maintain the flow of interaction. They had clearly discussed among themselves how to handle this first major family gathering, and their collective strategy of normalizing the new dynamic through their own behavior proved remarkably effective. Their resilience and adaptability reminded all the adults present of what was most important to preserve during this period of change. After lunch, the traditional Christmas walk took on new significance. The group moved through Windsor's grounds, with a formation that had subtly shifted, William and Catherine no longer walking side by side but still within the family group, still sharing moments of parental coordination and quiet appreciation for their children's happiness. The photographers who captured this moment for public consumption found images that spoke of evolution rather than dissolution, of a family finding new ways to be together. Evening brought the most challenging part of the day, as extended family gathered for what had traditionally been the most intimate celebration of their Christmas tradition. Catherine's presence was missed in ways both large and small, from the absence of her careful attention to everyone's dietary preferences to the quiet way she had always ensured that conversations included, rather than excluded, more reserved family members. William found himself taking on hosting responsibilities that had been naturally shared, learning new aspects of family management that Catherine had handled seamlessly for years. The day concluded with private moments as each parent helped settle the children for the night. These bedtime conversations, happening in different houses but maintaining familiar rhythms of storytelling and quiet connection, became small victories in their ongoing effort to preserve what mattered most. The children's ability to find comfort and security in both environments spoke to the success of their parents' commitment to putting family welfare above personal discomfort. As Catherine and William each prepared for sleep in their separate homes, Both found themselves reflecting on a day that had been simultaneously difficult and successful. They had navigated their first major family celebration as separated parents, without losing the essential elements that made their family strong. The Christmas that could have marked an ending had instead demonstrated the possibility of new beginnings, different but not diminished, changed but not broken. Spring brought unexpected challenges as both William and Catherine began to truly establish their independent lives. The season of renewal seemed to mock the careful equilibrium they had maintained through the winter months. As longer days and warmer weather made their separation feel more permanent and less like a temporary arrangement that might somehow resolve itself. The gardens at Catherine's Cotswolds home began to bloom under her personal attention, each planted flower a small declaration of her commitment to building something entirely her own. The first major test came when Charlotte was hospitalized following a riding accident that, while not serious, required several days of medical observation. The crisis revealed both the strengths and complications of their new arrangement, as both parents rushed to be with their daughter, naturally falling into their old patterns of shared concern and coordinated care. The hospital room became a temporary reunion space, where their parental instincts overrode the careful boundaries they had established, reminding everyone present of the deep partnership that parenthood had created between them. Medical decisions that once would have been made seamlessly now required phone calls and consultations between two households. Catherine found herself staying in a hotel near the hospital, rather than the family apartment they had maintained in London, a small detail that highlighted how many assumptions about shared space and shared decision-making needed to be rethought. William arrived with his security detail and official obligations, while Catherine's presence was more flexible but equally intense, creating a dynamic that the hospital staff struggled to navigate. Diplomatically, Charlotte's recovery became an opportunity for both parents to demonstrate their continued commitment to unified parenting despite their personal separation. They took turns staying overnight, coordinated with medical staff as a team, and maintained the kind of cheerful, reassuring presence that their daughter needed during her recovery. The sight of them together, focused entirely on Charlotte's welfare, reminded observers of what had made their partnership so effective and what would continue despite the end of their marriage. The incident also revealed how the public was beginning to adjust to their new normal. Media coverage focused on their effectiveness as co-parents, rather than speculating about reconciliation. And the respectful distance maintained by photographers suggested a growing understanding that some family moments deserved privacy regardless of royal status. The maturity shown by both the press and the public in handling this family crisis marked a significant shift in how their separation was being perceived and covered. As Charlotte recovered and normal routines resumed, both William and Catherine found themselves dealing with a different kind of adjustment. The crisis had temporarily returned them to their old dynamic of shared decision-making and mutual support, making the return to separate lives feel more jarring than it had before. They had to consciously rebuild the boundaries that had become second nature, carefully stepping back from the easy intimacy that crisis had restored. Catherine used the experience as motivation to become more involved in healthcare charities, finding in this work a sense of purpose that felt entirely her own, rather than an extension of royal duty. Her visits to hospitals took on a different quality, more personal and less formal, as she drew on her recent experience as a parent navigating medical crisis. The authenticity of her engagement was noticed by both staff and patients, creating more meaningful connections than the ceremonial visits that had characterized much of her previous charitable work. William found himself reassessing the balance between his official responsibilities and his availability as a father. The hours spent at Charlotte's bedside had reminded him of the irreplaceable value of being present for his children's important moments, leading him to restructure his calendar to ensure more flexibility for family emergencies and celebrations. His staff noticed a new firmness in his protection of family time, a clearer line between his public duties and his private commitments. The children, meanwhile, had demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence in managing their parents' careful dance around each other during the hospital stay. They had naturally coordinated to ensure that neither parent felt excluded, while also respecting the space each needed to process their own emotions about the situation. Their ability to navigate these complex dynamics suggested a level of emotional maturity that both impressed and concerned their parents. As spring turned toward summer, the family found its new rhythm more established but also more complex. School events, sporting competitions, and social gatherings required ongoing coordination between two households. But the systems they had developed during Charlotte's recovery proved adaptable to less dramatic circumstances. The wordless communication that had once characterized their marriage had evolved into a different kind of understanding, focused on their shared commitment to their children's well-being above all other considerations. The season ended with a sense that they had all learned something important about resilience and adaptation. The family they were becoming was different from the family they had been, but it was proving to be sustainable in ways that their marriage, ultimately, had not been. The goodbye was still wordless, but it was no longer goodbye alone. It was also hello to whatever came next. A year had passed since the announcement that changed everything, and the first anniversary of their separation arrived with little fanfare, but significant reflection. Catherine marked the day quietly, spending time in her garden where she had planted a memorial rose garden, not for anything that had died, but for something that had transformed. Each bloom represented a lesson learned about independence, resilience, and the different forms that love could take when freed from the constraints of institutional expectations. William spent the anniversary day in his study, reviewing the year's achievements and challenges in his official role. The experience of navigating royal duties without Catherine's partnership had taught him new aspects of leadership, forced him to develop diplomatic skills he had relied on her to provide, and given him a different understanding of the weight his future crown would carry. He had grown into the space her absence created, but the growth had come at the cost of easy collaboration and shared burden. The children had their own private ways of marking the anniversary. George organized a family dinner that brought everyone together without acknowledging the date's significance. His diplomatic skills a blend of both parents' best qualities. Charlotte spent extra time with each parent individually, offering quiet support through her presence rather than words. Louis created a photo album documenting their first year as a different kind of family, his artistic eye capturing moments of happiness and connection that proved their essential bonds remained strong. Public perception had evolved significantly over the year. Initial shock had given way to respect for how the separation was being managed, and eventually to a kind of admiration for the maturity and grace both William and Catherine had shown throughout the process. Opinion polls suggested that their handling of personal crisis had actually strengthened public confidence in the monarchy's ability to adapt and evolve while maintaining its core values. The international community had also taken notice of their approach. Other royal families facing similar pressures began to look to William and Catherine's model as an example of how personal challenges could be managed without damaging institutional stability. Diplomatic relations remained unaffected, and their separate charitable work had actually expanded their combined influence in ways that their joint activities had not achieved. Catherine's personal transformation continued to unfold in ways that surprised even those closest to her. Free from the constraints of representing the future monarchy, she had rediscovered interests and abilities that had been set aside during her years of royal duty. Her artwork had developed from a private hobby into something approaching professional quality, and her garden had become a laboratory for sustainable agriculture techniques that she was beginning to share with environmental organizations. The financial arrangements of their separation had been handled with the same discretion that characterized every other aspect of their transition. Catherine's independence was real rather than symbolic, her new household efficiently run, and her charitable work funded through carefully structured arrangements that ensured her dignity while respecting royal financial protocols. The freedom to make her own choices about how to spend her time and resources had proven energizing in ways she had not anticipated. William's growth as a future monarch had accelerated during his year of solo royal duty. Without the safety net of Catherine's social skills and diplomatic intuition, he had been forced to develop these abilities himself, resulting in a more complete preparation for kingship than might have occurred otherwise. His advisors noticed increased confidence in his decision-making and a new willingness to take positions on complex issues without seeking consensus. First, the question that had haunted the early months of their separation, whether they had made the right choice, had been answered not through dramatic revelation, but through the accumulation of small evidences of improved well-being all around. The children were thriving academically and socially, their relationships with both parents deeper and more individual than they had been when the family functioned as a single unit. Extended family members had adapted to the new dynamic and found unexpected benefits in the more flexible arrangements. Most telling was the evolution of William and Catherine's own relationship with each other. The careful politeness of early separation had given way to a more natural friendship, one based on shared history and common interests rather than romantic partnership or institutional obligation. They had discovered that they genuinely liked each other as people, separate from their roles as spouse or co-parent. And this friendship provided a foundation for cooperation that felt more sustainable than their marriage had ultimately proven to be. As the anniversary evening approached, both found themselves feeling unexpectedly optimistic about the future. The year had tested every aspect of their new arrangement and found it workable, even beneficial in many ways. The goodbye that had once felt like an ending was revealing itself to be a transformation, an evolution into something that honored their past, while creating space for individual growth and authentic happiness. The day concluded with a family video call that included all 5 of them, a spontaneous connection that happened naturally rather than being scheduled or forced. Their easy laughter and comfortable conversation served as the best possible evidence that some endings, handled with enough care and wisdom, could become beginnings that no one had imagined but everyone could embrace. 2 years after their wordless goodbye, William and Catherine found themselves standing together once again, this time watching their youngest son Louis receive his A-level results with the kind of proud satisfaction that transcended their personal history. The moment felt both familiar and entirely new, their shared joy in their son's achievements unmarked by the complications that had once made. Such simple parental moments feel weighted with unspoken tensions. The family gathering that followed Louis's success was hosted at Catherine's Cotswolds home, now fully established as a warm and welcoming space that felt distinctly hers, while remaining completely accessible to all the children. William arrived with the same ease he might bring to visiting any close friend. The awkwardness that had initially marked such occasions long since replaced by genuine comfort in each other's separate spaces. The conversation over dinner revealed how much each of them had grown during their time apart. Catherine spoke with infectious enthusiasm about her latest conservation project, a rewilding initiative that had captured international attention and positioned her as a thought leader in environmental restoration. William shared updates about his constitutional duties with a confidence and depth of understanding that suggested his preparation for kingship had reached new levels of sophistication and personal ownership. George, now graduated and beginning his own career in sustainable finance, had become a bridge between his parents' different worlds. Equally comfortable discussing policy with his father and environmental science with his mother, Charlotte, thriving in her university studies of international relations, had developed a diplomatic grace that drew from both parents while remaining entirely her own. Louis, preparing for his own university journey, showed signs of inheriting the best qualities of both parents while developing his own unique perspective on service and responsibility. The evening's success was measured not in the absence of any mention of their separation, but in how naturally their past together was integrated into their present apart. Stories from their marriage were shared alongside updates about their current separate projects, creating a narrative that honored their history while celebrating their evolution. The children moved seamlessly between conversations about shared memories and individual futures, their emotional intelligence a testament to how well the transition had been managed. As the gathering concluded, William and Catherine found themselves alone in her garden, while the children cleaned up inside. The conversation that followed was perhaps the most honest they had shared since their separation began, touching on regrets and gratitudes with equal measure. Neither expressed any desire to change the course they had chosen, but both acknowledged the genuine grief that had accompanied letting go of their shared dreams and the genuine joy that had come from discovering who they could become individually. The success of their separation had become a model studied by family therapists and royal historians alike, not because it had been painless, but because it had been handled with such consistent commitment to everyone's well-being. Their choice to prioritize their children's stability, their own personal growth, and the integrity of the institution they served had required daily sacrifices of ego and occasional comfort, but had ultimately created something more sustainable than what they had lost. Catherine's transformation into an independent advocate for environmental causes had given her a platform and purpose that felt entirely authentic, while William's development as a future monarch had benefited from the necessity of learning to carry royal responsibilities without leaning on a partner's strengths. Their children had gained something precious, parents who were genuinely happy in their own lives and therefore able to offer love and support from a place of fulfillment rather than obligation. The public's acceptance of their new normal had evolved into something approaching admiration for the grace and maturity with which they had handled an impossible situation. Their example had sparked conversations about the nature of commitment, the possibility of love taking different forms, and the importance of creating space for individual growth even within the closest relationships. As William prepared to leave that evening, the goodbye they exchanged was still wordless, but it carried entirely different meaning than it had 2 years earlier, where once silence had been heavy with everything that couldn't be said. Now it was light with everything that no longer needed saying. They had found their way to a relationship that honored their past while embracing their separate futures, proving that some endings, when handled with enough wisdom and care, could become the most beautiful kinds of new beginnings. The wordless goodbye had taught them all that love doesn't always look like staying together. Sometimes it looks like having the courage to grow apart while remaining forever connected by the family they had created and the respect they had maintained for each other through the most difficult transformation of their lives. Their story had become one of evolution rather than ending, of wisdom rather than failure, of love finding new forms when old ones were no longer sustainable.